Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining this little photography talk. I'm just going to sort of have a look at the way that I take fungi photos and show you some of the photos that I take, how I take them, and sort of talk about the equipment that I use. And then at the end, I'll have an opportunity for you to sort of ask any questions. And yeah, so if you've got any specific sort of hints or tips you'd like, just let me know. Let us know, and then we'll see what I can do about helping. I'm just going to start with having a look at the equipment that I use. That's my the main camera that I use. It's a Fujifilm X-T20, and it's a type of camera that's called a mirrorless camera. So it functions in a very similar way to a sort of DSLR, so like the bigger cameras, but it has the advantage of being quite small and lightweight. And that's one of the features that I find particularly good about it. It's also an interchangeable lens camera, so you can use lots of different kinds of lenses. Not only sort of ones that are specifically made for it, but with the right adapter, you can use pretty much sort of any camera, any lens that's ever been made, which is quite neat. But with being small and light, does come some disadvantages. So it can be quite difficult to actually hold some of these mirrorless cameras. So I've also got a small rig L bracket on that's got this extra little wooden handle that helps me to hold it, and makes the ergonomics of it far better, especially if you're carrying it around for long periods of time. I've also got this wrist strap. I don't really like neck straps or shoulder straps because I find they get in the way a bit. So I've just got this small Peak Design wrist strap that's very handy for just making sure that you don't drop the camera. The Peak Design system also means that you can remove it very quickly. So if you do want to swap between a wrist strap and a neck strap, you can just by unclipping here at the side. So I also use this little Olympus Tg5 as well, a little sort of point and shoot camera. Now this has the advantage of being very small and lightweight, but it's also waterproof. So if it's tipping down with rain, you can just you can carry that around without worrying that it's going to get damaged by water, and also put it into quite tight spaces as well. It's very well protected, so it won't get damaged if it falls in the mud or gets dirty in any other way. So it's a great little thing to have as a backup if the conditions are bad. These are sort of the pictures it takes. It's got a few handy features like focus stacking. So these are both examples of the output that you can get from it. It's got you can get nice and close into the base of the fungi and take some pretty nice shots. Although I mainly just use it as a sort of to take sort of record shots of the species I see sort of on a walk, rather than try to take more kind of artistic shots or anything like that. It's a useful little thing to have around. And so these are some of the lenses that I use. They are a variety of different lenses for different tasks. So I'll mention these briefly, then look at some of the photos that I've taken with each one, and talk about what sort of situation you might use them in. So starting on the left here with the Laowa 65mm, that's a sort of dedicated macro lens. In the summer, I mainly use that for taking photographs of insects. But it's also quite good for getting close to really small fungi. Then moving on, there's the Chiron 105 macro lens. That's a quite old vintage lens. It's all metal body, so very heavy as well, but it's the sort of the classic focal length for a macro lens, and that's very good for sort of producing isolated photos of portrait type photos of fungi. Then we've got a Helios lens. That's a very old lens, vintage lens from Russia. And then we've got the Opteka, a 15mm wide angle macro lens. That's a quite unique lens of a sort that's only been really started to be produced fairly recently. And it allows you to get very close to a subject, but also include quite a lot of the background as well. Another little handy piece of equipment to have in the bag is this little tripod. It's small, it's mostly made from plastic, so it's very light. That obviously means that it can't really support a huge amount of weight. So if you've got a big sort of heavy DSLR or camera like that, but for a mirrorless camera, a little point and shoot, or even a mobile phone, you can get little brackets for mobile phones. It's ideal for that. The legs extend, so you can vary the height quite a lot, and they also flatten right down to sort of almost completely flat, so you can get very close to the ground. So this is the type of subject that I've used for the Laowa lens, the high magnification macro lens. This is just a little maybe sort of 1 or 2 centimeters across. It's got lovely drops of water, and yeah, it's able to capture the detail of that little fungus extremely well. And this is taken with the Chiron 105 macro lens, so it's a lot longer focal length, so a longer working distance from the subject if you want to get them all in. But the qualities of this lens really mean that it sort of accentuates some of the subtle colours that you get. So the beautiful pinks in the base of the marram grass, and the nice fresh greens as well, and even the sort of the nice shades of brown in the dead branches of the dead blades of grass as well. So yeah, you can get really nice sort of isolated portraits of fungi. And there's another shot taken with the same lens. Yeah, it's very, very good if you want to sort of focus in on a fungus, a little group of fungi, and take a nice tight shot like that. And this is the sort of photo you can take with that wide angle macro lens. So the reason I sort of bought the lens was because I wanted to take this type of image. So it's the type of image where you can not only see the fungus nicely, but you can also get a really good impression of what the environment looks like. So you can see what it grows on. In this case, a great big pile of dung. What the surrounding environment is like, the woodland that it's growing in, and really get a good impression of the ecology of the fungus and the environment that it grows in. And there's another example of the type of image that you can get, showing that this nice brown birch bolete growing in its heathland habitat with the heather blossoms all around it, and the birch trees that it's living in symbiosis with in the background. And this is a sort of nice example to show maybe some of the different environments that fungi can grow in. So here you can this is growing on the side of a very busy road in Birmingham, and the wide angle of view means that you can capture the cars and road in the background, and the row of shops and houses behind it as well. So giving a real impression of the environment and ecology of this species. And here's a photo of showing the wet woodland in Sutton Park, again in Birmingham, to the north of Birmingham. There you can start to see the boggy woodland that this tawny grisette's growing in, the trees that it's living with, and some of the plants and the sphagnum moss around the base as well. So it gives a really good sort of overall impression of what the ecology of this species is. And you can step back even further as well and get a sort of really wide angle shot showing more detail of the background, the sphagnum moss and the trees that the species are living in symbiosis with. Now here's another one on the same patch of road, a very productive spot for finding fungi. But so one of the things to bear in mind when you're taking photos with a wide angle lens is where the sun is. So you're almost whatever direction you're pointing in, you'll often get the sun coming in at some point. Now I quite like the effect here. You've got some nice lens flares, but it can also make the image look a bit desaturated, shine onto the surface of the lens. So it's something to be aware of when you're kind of composing your shots. It's fairly easy to shade the sun with your hand or a piece of card if it does get in the way, or sort of move to an angle where it's not in the frame. And that is one of the things that I found with a very wide angle lens. So 15mm is pretty wide, and that it's actually quite difficult to imagine what a shot is going to look like in your mind before you actually sort of look at it, sort of actually take the photo. So it is really helpful to compose the shot on the back of the camera rather than just trying to sort of visualize it without the camera. With more sort of telephoto type lenses, it's much easier to sort of visualize what you're taking, and because you're only focusing on a narrow part of the image, it's much less easy to sort of imagine what a wide angle shot will actually look like as a photograph. And again, the wide angle means that you can get a nice sort of close perspective on fungi like this lovely oyster mushroom. And here is a shot taken with the Helios 44 M4 lens. This is a lens that was made in the old Soviet Union, and sort of technically, if you want to sort of look at the way it's designed and stuff, you'll find that it's got a lot of what you view as imperfections, but these imperfections actually give it a very nice character, and it means you can get some quite unique images with it. So you can get this beautiful sort of almost abstract, blurry backgrounds, and another example, little bonnets. But yeah, they're incredibly narrow depth of field there, but producing quite a nice effect with a beautiful blurred background again. So this is just another view of what the lens actually looks like. So this is it has a mount called the M42 mount, which is just a very simple screw, and then below it is an adapter that enables me to mount it on my camera. Now this is a slightly unusual adapter. most of them just contain a sort of screw at the top and then a mount for the camera at the end. But this one has an extra feature, which is a sort of focusing helicoid. So this ring will actually make the mount a bit longer, and that acts like an extension tube, and means that you can get much closer to the subjects than you would normally. So the sort of standard focusing distance is about 0.5 meter, but with the focusing helicoid, that adds extra length between the lens and the camera. It means you can get extremely close to subjects, and they can really fill the frame. And another example of the sort of photos you can take with this. The other advantage of some of these lenses, like the Helios, is that they're fairly cheap to get hold of. They were produced in their millions in the old Soviet Union. They were the sort of standard lens that came with the most popular cameras, and so they're available on places like eBay for sort of £20 or £30, and you can get some really quite nice and sort of unusual effects with these vintage lenses. If you do have any kind of old camera equipment, it's worth looking out, because old lenses from film cameras, you might have inherited a set of lenses or something like that from a relative, but now most of them can be adapted to modern digital cameras, and a lot of these lenses are extremely sort of good quality. They were well manufactured and designed, and so they can give some really nice effects. So yeah, if you do have any old lenses knocking about in the cupboard, it's worth digging them out and seeing what they can be used for. Some of them are really nice and take some beautiful images. So the other important, one of the most important things when it comes to photographing fungi is the lighting. So I almost always use a flash when I'm taking photos. So I use this Godox. It's a Chinese sort of lighting and flash manufacturer, and they produce them for a whole series. Almost every brand of camera has a sort of compatible version. And then I also use this kind of flash diffuser on it as well to make the lighting look more natural and a bit less harsh. And I also have these little LED light cubes as well. You can get these fairly cheaply on eBay, just like sort of 10 to 15 pounds each. They sort of come with their own batteries. They're rechargeable from a USB cable, and the charge seems to last a decent amount of time. They do have a habit of sort of not falling over when you try and put them on a irregular surface like the floor of a forest. So I've also got this little Gorilla Pod arm that you can link the two together, or and that sort of gives them a bit of extra stability, so you can angle them in the right direction, and yeah, you can either use them together or as individual lights. So this is an example of sort of why I like to use flash to photograph fungi. So this is a long exposure just using the natural light, and as you can see, it's the light filtering through the leaves of the wood has given the fungi a very sort of unnatural greenish colour to them. And it is possible to sort of partially correct for this using software, but it's not because the lighting isn't consistent. There are some of it's more greenish, some of it's sort of natural light. You do actually have this sort of mixed lighting, and in that case, it is very difficult to correct for. So it's much better if you supply your own light rather than relying on just natural light. And there's a photo taken with a flash that shows the difference between the flash and the natural light. So you get the much more sort of natural colouring on the sort of whitish surface of the fungi. When you're using a flash as well, obviously it'll only extend for a fairly short distance from the front of your camera. So if you've got a quite dark background, if you use a fairly short shutter speed, that background will be dark. So you can improve make your backgrounds brighter by having a slower shutter speed. Obviously, there comes a point when your shutter speed is a bit too slow to hold the camera without introducing camera shake. But it's also possible so in that case you'll need to have some sort of support, either a tripod or a little bean bag, or even just resting it on your rucksack or something like that can act as a temporary support to enable longer exposures, but to brighten up the background as well. So when you're taking photos of a fungus with a big cap with a flash, you often get this sort of shading underneath, and that's where those little LED lights come in really useful. So you can just arrange them so that they're angled upwards under the fungus, and add in that little extra bit of light to balance out, to illuminate the details of the underside of the cap and the stem as well. So, yeah, that's what that looks like. Adding a bit of extra light just to stop that shadowy area from losing detail. Now this is one where I think I've used those little LED lights a bit too much, so that's given a bit of an effect of it's kind of an artificial effect of flattening out the lighting a bit too much and making the fungus look a little bit unnatural. So I'd probably move the lighting back a bit, just maybe angle it down to point more at these dark areas behind the stem and underneath the cap, rather than at the front of the cap itself, just to make sure that the light wasn't too artificial. Now, often, even if you do have a wide-angle lens, so this was taken with the 15mm lens, it's still not possible to capture everything you can in one shot. So this is actually a composite of two different photos, each one taking up maybe sort of two-thirds of this image, because you do need a bit of overlap to stitch photos together. But it enables to have this view showing the little fungi in the foreground and Birmingham St Philip's Cathedral in the background. There's another view from a slightly different perspective. So if you move a bit further back, you can get the cathedral more in focus, but then you do lose quite a lot of detail from the fungi, and they get a bit lost in the grass in the foreground. And here's another one, another churchyard, this time in Halesowen, and again it's sort of illustrating how important churchyards are for many different kinds of fungi and showing the ecology of this species quite well. This was a composite of a few more images, maybe 5 or 6 different ones together, because being closer to the church spire, it went up quite a long way. And this is the software that I use if I'm adding images together, stitching images. It's called Image Composite Editor, made by Microsoft. I think it only works for Windows computers, but it's a really quite simple and straightforward to use, and it's really good at stitching images together, producing sort of almost flawless results pretty much every time. So it's worth downloading a copy and trying out. And that means that even if you do have, if you don't have a wide angle lens, if you take a whole series of different photos, you can get that wide angle effect and show more details of the background as well as just the subject. And so one of the things that is a feature of close-up photography is that the depth of field that you can get is very narrow. So in this photo, you only really the front of the cap of one fungus is visible. All of the detail of the stem, the ring, and the other fungi in the image are kind of lost. But again, if you take a series of different images at different focusing on different points of the fungi, then you can, like this. So we go from focusing on the cap, on the front of the cap, to gradually deeper, like a series of slices deeper into the image until everything you want to be in focus is in focus, and then you can, using the magic of software, combine them all together and get a fully focused image. And this is the software I usually use. It's called Combine ZP. It's another piece of freely available software. There are also commercial focus stacking software that have a few more kind of advanced features and things like that. But this one does produce pretty decent results, and you can get some really nice effects from it. There's what the output looks like. So by combining all of those sort of separate images together with different, focused on different points, you can get a almost completely perfectly focused image. So now the front of the cap's in focus, the stem, the ring, and you can really sort of see the different features of the fungi in great detail. So it's perfect if you want to be able to show someone all of their sort of identification features you might look for in a particular species. So it's more looking at trying to sort of document accurately a fungus rather than just taking a sort of more artistic shot. Now, obviously there are a few artifacts you might notice. So in the sides and where this blade of grass has moved, there's a few sort of strange looking bits. It's probably possible to sort of Photoshop them out or crop them out to a great degree. Some of the commercial focus stacking software have kind of retouching tools, so you can sort of paint out some of these artifacts, which is quite handy. But yeah, you can probably also crop a lot of them out, and most of them aren't that noticeable. And there's another example of a focus stacked image. uh, I do sometimes find them they do look a bit artificial, slightly strange, and almost slightly surreal. Um, but they are great if you want to um, sort of really document all of the features of a particular fungus. And so one of the key things to look out for when you're taking fungi photos, and something that often catches me out, is sort of strange details in the background. Um, so it's very easy just to focus on your subject and to perhaps ignore what's going on in the background. And this image on the far left has this. I think it's a blurry twig, and I really don't like this. It's very. I find it very distracting from the main subject. Um, I took a few more photos of the same fungus from a slightly different angle, and the same twig is still visible in this. Not quite as bad this time, but still just about visible. Um, so what I've done is I've tried to basically try to remove it in Photoshop because I really didn't like it. And that's the result on the right, which I think they've done Photoshop's done a fairly good job of removing those that sort of that horrible background. Um, Obviously, it would have been a bit easier if I'd have spotted that at the time and gone with an angle that didn't have a distracting background. Um, but that it is possible to fix it even if you do get something like that in. Um, the other things to look for as well are any features. The most distracting features are things that line up with some of the lines of your subject. So, for example, a tree that lines up perfectly behind the stem of the fungus, or some horizontal twig that lines up with the base of the gills, and those tend to be really sort of detrimental to the overall look of an image, and adds a lot of distraction to the background. So it's always worth just sort of reviewing the photos once you've taken them, to have a sort of check of the background, anything you might have missed when you're just looking through the viewfinder or trying to compose the image on in the camera. And here's an example of something of a really beautiful fungus that was ruined a bit by sort of extraneous vegetation. So I do always try to if there's not a big leaf or something like that on a fungus, I do remove them if it's distracting. But I did miss this little blade of grass on the left there. But again, that's something that I managed to fix in Photoshop. And so there, I'll just go back to the original and back to the Photoshop version. So it is possible, if there are any slight flaws in an image like that, which I think would have been very distracting if I'd left it in, it is possible to touch them up a bit and dramatically improve what the image will look like. If you are looking for sort of more sources of advice, probably one of the best places to look is YouTube. There are loads of really good people, loads of really good photographers out there. People like I mentioned just a handful, but if you just search for any subject on YouTube, you'll find someone who's made a video on it. They'll go into detail of things like how to they haven't really touched on things like how to process your photos, so how to improve them, using image processing software and things like that. But yeah, it is really worth having a look around, and if you want to sort of improve your photography, to have a look at places like YouTube and see who's out there and if they have good advice. As well, I just wanted to sort of plug this little book that I found quite useful, looking at wide angle macro photography, and been quite inspirational, sort of looking at some of the techniques and things that it's possible to achieve with wide angle macro photography. And I think that's basically it from me. Follow me on all the social medias if you want, and yeah, I think that's it. So if you have any questions, let Nathan know, and I'll see if I can answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Lucas. That was very informative. We've actually already got a couple of questions in the chat already.
Excellent.
So if people want to ask questions, you want to post them in the chat, and then we can run them across. So we've got two, and I'm going to stitch them together. Jessica asks, what is the name of the free photo combining software you use? And Evelina asks, how do you decide between using image stacking versus adjusting f-stop?
So the one that sort of just combined like the kind of panorama software is called Image Composite Editor. It's a bit of sort of a generic sounding name, and that's produced by Microsoft. For the image stacking, I use Combine. It's called Combine ZP, so all one word, just combine and then followed by ZP. And again, that's if you just search for that, that should come up with the download for that. So the other one was about sort of image stacking versus f-stop. So if I'm trying to take the wide angle images, there's normally a trade-off between f-stop and depth of field. So the image quality of a lens tends to increase the sharpness, and depth of field tends to increase as you increase the f-stop up until about halfway. So that's normally f8 or f11 for a lot of lenses. Once you get above that, you do get increased depth of field, but then you also get a phenomenon called diffraction, and that reduces the overall image quality by making everything look slightly blurrier or fuzzy. Yeah, if I am at sort of f11, say, and I still can't get everything in focus I want to get focused, then I'll tend to use focus stacking.
Wonderful. We've got a lot of people saying some nice comments. We've got Jessica saying thanks. I'll read the comment here. Thanks. And thanks for a really interesting presentation. Leah says this was brilliant. I've been looking for fungi specific photography tips for ages. Thank you so much. We've got a question from Jeanette, who asks, when photographing a pale coloured fruit body, what is the best way to prevent it losing the detail?
Yeah, I mean that can be tricky, I have to say. So again, one of the things you might do is take two different photos. So take one where you set the exposure just for the fruiting body, and then another one where you set it for the background, and then combine those two together to create one photo. So that's sort of more you'd call that sort of high dynamic range imaging. And there's software that will combine sort of very dark and very light images together to create one photo. I think Photoshop does it sort of, but there's a few more specific pieces of software that will do it as well. So that's probably the best way, is to take sort of multiple images. You can also change your camera's metering. So you'll have most cameras have different metering modes. So there's like spot metering, which will just look at just evaluate the exposure based on a tiny little spot on your camera. And then there's also modes that will evaluate all of the different parts of an image together. So if you've got very high contrast between your subject and your background, it might be a good idea to switch to spot metering and make sure that the spot is exactly focused on the camera, so it'll base its exposure on your subject rather than sort of looking at the whole of the image, or trying to balance the background and the foreground and subject exposure.
Wonderful. Bruce says using the histogram is very helpful to prevent blowing up the details.
Yep, and you can also have a little setting as well, where you can have it'll kind of blink black or white if you into over or underexposed areas of the image as well. So that's quite a handy feature to turn on.
So just while we're waiting for like any last questions, I wonder, we've seen a lot of these photographing of like individual fungi. How do you photograph a community of different species?
Well, that does tend to be more difficult, and certainly if you like one of the things that I haven't really quite been able to get good photos of is of nice fungi fairy rings. So when you get a really big sort of ring of fungi in a wood, I think being able to show all of them together, I think is extremely tricky. And I have to say, I haven't really come up with a good solution. I've tried to sort of stitch images together and things like that, but it does all tend to disappear, and it can be quite difficult to actually get the idea of the ring of fungi. You tend just to be able to see sort of little line segments and things like that. I mean, again, trying to get as wide an angle in as possible. Or one thing you might try doing as well is to take panoramic images. So moving your camera horizontally. If you have a nice sort of grouping of fungi, move it horizontally and get a long sort of strip of photos that you can then stitch together.
Oh, fantastic. Well, there's no more questions have popped up, which I think is testament to how amazing your presentation was. So I think I'm going to ramble for a couple of seconds just in case there's any last bits or pieces, but feel free to close and bring us home.
Hey, I'll just show you this. If you're there are actually a couple of books sort of completely dedicated to fungi photography. But yeah, it is, and also books that focus on plant photography, sort of contain a lot of the applicable techniques as well. So if you're looking for more detailed guides as well, look for books on either general sort of macro photography or sort of how to photograph plants, because those tend to have a lot of sort of useful tips and techniques as well.
Fantastic. Well, I think you all join me in giving a massive thanks to Lukas, who has done an outstanding presentation on photographing fungi. I believe he's joining us in 15 minutes for our garden foray, so we shall give him a chance to grab a cup of tea. But thank you all for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you to Lukas.
Yep, thank you all for listening. Cheers. Bye.